In the year 1954, the nations of post-war Europe came together to build something unprecedented. On the border of Switzerland and France, they would construct a laboratory dedicated to the most fundamental questions about the nature of reality. What is matter made of? What are the forces that hold the universe together? What happened in the first moments after creation? That laboratory is CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and the machine they eventually built, the Large Hadron Collider, completed in 2008, is the most complex and expensive scientific instrument in human history. 17 miles of supercooled tunnels, 10,000 scientists from over 100 countries, a budget that runs into billions of dollars annually. The official story is that CERN studies particle physics. They have made genuine discoveries. The Higgs boson, confirmed in 2012, was a genuine triumph of experimental physics. These are real things. We are not dismissing the science. But there is another layer to CERN that the institution itself has acknowledged, quietly, in the language of theoretical physics, a language most of the public does not read. In the theoretical framework that guides much of CERN's research, our universe is what physicists call a brane, a three-dimensional membrane, floating in a higher dimensional space called the bulk. The bulk contains additional dimensions that are theoretically real, mathematically necessary, but inaccessible to our perception. CERN's researchers have explicitly stated, in papers published in peer-reviewed journals, that the Large Hadron Collider might be capable of detecting, or even briefly creating, a passage into these extra dimensions. At sufficiently high energies, particles might escape from our brain into the bulk, or, crucially, things from the bulk might briefly enter our brain. Former CERN scientist Dr. Sergio Bertolucci, who served as the director of research at the institution, said in an interview that the LHC might open a door to another dimension. He added that he was not sure what would come through such a door. He was framing it as a theoretical possibility, but he was not speaking loosely. He was a senior scientist at the world's most advanced physics laboratory. What Bertolucci described in the cautious language of theoretical physics, the Quran describes in direct language. There is a veil, the Quran calls it the barzakh in one context, and describes in other verses the boundaries Allah has placed between different realms of existence. These are not decorative theological concepts. They are described as real, functional boundaries, barriers that exist for a reason, that separate realms of existence which should not interpenetrate without divine permission. The question that serious researchers have begun to ask is whether an institution with the energy output and dimensional probing capacity of the LHC is, intentionally or otherwise, applying pressure to that boundary. Geography matters in the study of ancient power. Sacred sites, places where the veil between dimensions was traditionally believed to be thinner, have been deliberately selected by every major civilization for their most important structures. Temples, oracle sites, places of worship and ritual all tended to cluster at locations where something about the land itself seemed to facilitate contact with the unseen. CERN is built on land that the ancient Romans called Apollyon. This name is significant. The Romans built a temple to Apollo there, Apollo being the deity associated in Roman religion with the sun, with prophecy, with the opening of gates between worlds. The name Apollyon appears in the Book of Revelation as the angel of the bottomless pit, the entity who holds the key to the abyss. So, whether this geographical correspondence is meaningful or coincidental is a question each viewer must weigh, but it is a fact. The world's most powerful dimensional probing machine sits on land that ancient peoples specifically identified as a boundary site, a place where the walls between worlds were believed to be thin. CERN's own campus is decorated with a statue of Shiva Nataraja, the Hindu deity of destruction and transformation, specifically associated with the cosmic dance that dissolves one state of reality and creates another. It was formally presented by the Indian government in 2004. The institution chose to display it prominently at its entrance. When researchers asked why, they were told it represents the dance of subatomic particles. Perhaps. Or perhaps the people who made that selection knew exactly what they were looking at. Now, here is something CERN historians acknowledge but do not emphasize. The mathematics that made the LHC possible was built on foundations laid by some of the most unusual figures in the history of science. Jack Parsons was a founding member of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the institution that became NASA's primary research arm. He was also a devoted follower of Aleister Crowley, the occultist who systematized the most sophisticated Western framework for ritual jinn contact in the modern era. Parsons performed rituals he called Babylon working, designed, according to his own writings, to open a dimensional gateway and allow a non-human intelligence to manifest in the physical world. He did this in 1946. His laboratory partner during this period was a young man named L. Ron Hubbard, who would later found Scientology. What both men believed they were doing, tearing a controlled opening in the dimensional boundary, is precisely what the theoretical physics framework at CERN describes, in different language, as the goal of high-energy collider experiments. The lineage connects, from ancient ritual to modern physics, from the occult magician working in the California desert to the multinational institution working beneath the Alps. The goal has remained consistent. Open the door. The difference is scale. The difference is energy. And the difference is that this time it is being done with the resources of governments, the credibility of science, and the enthusiastic funding of the global establishment, which raises the question we have been building toward. Who, precisely, is the global establishment? Who runs it? Who funds it? What do they actually believe? And what do they want from the other side of that door? That question takes us to the oldest secret society in the modern world, and to a text written by one of its most senior members that answers these questions more directly than anyone in the institution ever intended. So listen carefully. In 1871, a man named Albert Pike completed a book that he never intended for general circulation. He was the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The book was called Morals and Dogma. It was distributed only to the highest-ranking initiates of the order. And in it, Pike wrote something that should have ended the public debate about what Freemasonry actually teaches, but instead was quietly filed away and forgotten by the institutions that might have addressed it. He wrote that the initiates of the lower degrees are deliberately misled. He wrote that the true doctrine of the order, the real philosophy at its core, is revealed only at the summit of the initiatory system. And he named the entity at the center of that true doctrine. He named Lucifer, not as a symbol of enlightenment in a Roman literary sense. Pike was explicit that this was not metaphor. He described Lucifer as the light bearer, as the true object of the highest initiatory reverence, as the being who stands opposite. This is their own document, written by their own Grand Commander, available in university archives, not a conspiracy theory, a primary source. And when you understand what Lucifer is, when you understand that Iblis, the entity the Quran identifies as the leader of the Shayateen, is the same entity that appears under different names across every Western occult tradition, the architecture of the hidden alliance becomes visible. Secret societies do not announce their true purpose. This is definitional. They are secret. But they do have a consistent structure. And once you understand that structure, you understand how the alliance between humans and jinn is maintained across generations without the lower levels ever knowing what they are participating in. The model is graduated initiation. At the lowest levels, initiates are offered genuine community, genuine networking, genuine philosophical content that is perfectly respectable. At this level, the society functions exactly as it presents itself, a fraternal organization with charitable activities and a commitment to self-improvement. As the initiate rises, and rising requires invitation, selection, demonstration of complete loyalty, and useful leverage, the content changes. The philosophy deepens, the rituals become more serious, and eventually, at the highest levels, the mask comes fully off. The true deity is revealed. The true purpose is disclosed. And the initiate, who has by now spent decades building their career and their network under the organization's protection, faces a choice that most of them no longer have the ability to refuse. This is not speculation. This is the testimony of multiple defectors across multiple organizations, corroborated by the primary documents that have entered the public record through court proceedings, deathbed confessions, and accidental disclosure. Freemasonry is the most visible of these structures, but it is not the only one. Skull and Bones at Yale, the Order of the Eastern Star, various Rosicrucian orders. The OTO, the Order Templi Orientis, which Aleister Crowley led in the early 20th century. All of them follow the same graduated initiation model. All of them converge at the summit on the same entity. All of them have overlapping membership rosters with the political, financial, military, and cultural elite of the Western world. Every summer since 1872, some of the most powerful men in the world gather in a private redwood grove in Sonoma County, California. The guest list over the decades has included presidents, vice presidents, secretaries of state, CEOs of the world's largest corporations, military commanders, media executives, and senior intelligence officials. The gathering is called Bohemian Grove. It is not secret, it is acknowledged. The club itself publishes its existence. What happens inside is not for public record, but we know one thing that happens, because it has been documented by multiple sources, including a covert recording made in 2001 by journalist Alex Jones, who infiltrated the event. On the first night of the gathering, a ritual called the Cremation of Care is performed. The participants, these heads of state, these captains of industry, gather before a 40-foot concrete owl. An effigy is burned. The stated purpose of the ritual is to symbolically sacrifice their conscience for the duration of the gathering. The 40-foot owl is significant. The owl is the ancient symbol of Moloch, the entity to whom, in the Old Testament, the people of Canaan made sacrifices of children. Moloch appears in the Bible, in Milton, in ancient Semitic religious texts, always associated with fire, with sacrifice, and with the exchange of children for power and favor. These are not ordinary businessmen performing an innocent theatrical ceremony. These are people who understand symbolism. These are people who have access to the esoteric traditions that assign precise meaning to every element of ritual. The owl, the fire, the effigy, the grove, all of it is deliberately chosen. All of it corresponds to specific elements of a specific occult tradition. Former President Richard Nixon, recorded on the White House tapes, described Bohemian Grove as the most faggy goddamn thing you ever saw. What this tells us, aside from Nixon's colorful vocabulary, is that Nixon attended. Nixon was there. This was not a rumor. This was not a theory. The President of the United States was a regular attendee at a ritual gathering before a giant owl effigy in a California forest. And nobody, not the media, not the political opposition, not the educational establishment, has ever found this sufficiently remarkable to investigate seriously. Every effective empire needs a ministry of culture, a mechanism for shaping what the population believes is normal, desirable, possible, and real. In the ancient world, this function was performed by the state religion. It's controlled by the same priestly class that controlled political power, which was usually the same class. In the modern world, this function is performed by the entertainment industry. Hollywood was never a neutral creative enterprise. From its earliest days, it was financed by specific banking houses, controlled by specific studio systems, and its output was shaped by specific ideological agendas that have evolved but never disappeared. The scholars and researchers who have documented these connections, from Norman Finkelstein to Michael Medved to the declassified wartime OSS documents showing government influence on studio output, have established beyond reasonable doubt that Hollywood content is not simply the product of creative individuals following their artistic instincts. It is managed, but there is a layer beneath the political management that goes deeper, and you can see it if you learn to read the symbolism, the all-seeing eye. This symbol appears with a frequency in entertainment media that cannot be explained by coincidence or aesthetic preference. Album covers, film posters, music video imagery, award show stage design, fashion, editorial photography. The single eye, the eye inside the triangle, the eye of Horus, the symbol of jinn contact and occult initiation, appears constantly in the output of the industry whose most senior figures are, documented fact, members of the same initiatory structures we have been describing. The one-eye covered pose, hundreds of artists across decades photographed hovering one eye. Not occasionally, not as a quirky individual choice, but as a consistent, repeated, industry-wide visual vocabulary. This is a deliberate signal. It signals initiatory status. It signals allegiance. And it signals to others in the network that this person has been brought into the structure. The ritual performance. Major award shows, the Grammy Awards, the Super Bowl halftime show, have featured performances that analysts with knowledge of ceremonial magic have identified as structured rituals. The symbolic elements, the imagery, the narrative arc of the performances follow the pattern of specific occult ceremonies with a consistency that goes far beyond coincidence. Mass audiences of millions participate as unwitting witnesses, and in the mechanics of ceremonial magic, the energy of witnesses matters. The attention and emotional engagement of a large group is itself a kind of offering. We are not speculating about what happens when certain artists reach the summit of the entertainment industry. We have their own words. In a CBS 60s interview, legendary musician Bob Dylan was asked directly about the source of his extraordinary early success. He described it as a bargain. He said he made a deal, and when the interviewer pressed him on who he made it with, Dylan said, "With the chief commander."
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And on this earth, and then in the world we can't see.
In this world, and in the world he can't see. The interviewer moved on. The show aired. Nobody in the mainstream media found this remarkable. Dylan was not speaking loosely. He was not using colorful language. He was a man who had spent 60 years thinking carefully about every word he put into public discourse. He said what he meant. He made a deal with an entity in a world we cannot see. This is the transaction. This is the mechanism. The artist, the politician, the businessman, at the moment of their maximum ambition and minimum spiritual groundedness, is introduced through the network to a tradition of ritual contact. They perform the ritual, they make the request, and something answers. The career accelerates inexplicably. The obstacles dissolve. The right doors open at the right moments. The wealth arrives. The fame arrives. And the person who receives all of this knows, at some level, they may spend the rest of their lives suppressing exactly what they traded for it. But what is the end game? If Iblis and his network of Shayateen, operating through human allies and the elite, have been building this system for thousands of years, what are they building toward? And how does the most deliberately suppressed psychological program in modern history connect the Hollywood transaction, the CERN experiments, and the ancient Quranic warning into a single, coherent picture? That answer waits in the next video. Subscribe.